Select, graph, plant, observe. Select, graph, plant, and so on for generations. In many cases, they probably never ate or even saw the fruit before they died. They did this thing for us.
Hello, my name is Ria Windcaller, and I am the producer and cider MC of this weekly podcast, where we speak with makers, cider enthusiasts, and folks within the cider trade from around the world. Hip, hip, hooray! We heard from John Bunker, bringing us into this here episode number 422 of Cider Chat. He was talking about legacy, the legacy of those before us who selected, planted, grafted, and observed the apple trees, many of which that we today are still taking fruit from and making cider, or taking grafts from to keep their legacy going. And that's what you're going to be hearing a bit from John. You're going to be hearing his actual keynote address that was recorded at New York Apple Camp in 2023. It was held at the Ashokan Center, which is in New York. This was an amazing Apple Camp. It was the first ever held in New York at this level. And John gave this wonderful, inspiring keynote address. I'm going to be talking more about it coming up. But as always, if you don't know, we always have a little bit of news from out and about in Ciderville. So we're going to be rolling to that next. It has been a hot and humid summer in my special spot of Ciderville, which is good for the plants, but it's kind of tough on the body. So I do a release every other week during the summer so I could kind of hole up where there's a little bit of AC and get some other work done. Because don't you know, coming this September, I will be heading back to France for the French Cider Tour. Hooray! I can't wait. It's going to be incredible. Just sending out info to those folks who have signed up for the tour, who are going to be meeting me in Paris, and the fact that the Paris Olympics are now taking place at the same time this summer, 2024, it's just outstanding. And the cool thing about it, and I think that this is really good for everybody out there in Ciderville to kind of understand, if you haven't been to France or you haven't been to Europe, or even if you have and this hasn't been on your forefront. Well, it certainly has been on mine. One is, every time I go to a city, the first thing I do is I go to the river. I go to the water. If there is a canal ride somewhere, whether it's Amsterdam or England or France, I will take a boat ride to get a sense of the city and just drop into the vibe. And wow, that's how they did the entire Paris Olympics opening ceremony. 3 hours long, putting all the athletes on the boats that go up and down the Seine for the tours. They put the different countries there and showcase the Seine, having art in the water, and then the Eiffel Tower, and so much that was going on, with that ghost walking with the torch, and of course Snoop Dogg in between. Absolutely loving it. And what I learned from going to Europe, specifically France, is how they really bring people into the outdoors. This is not something new. Of course, they were going to do it outdoors because that's what they do. If you go to Rouen, which is a city out in Normandy, and you're in like the medieval area, there's a big cathedral church there. And what do? Outside, like every night during the summer, is they project on the outside of the building this magnificent story that you watch on the building, all set to music in the background. It's all outdoors. And that's exactly what they did in Paris. It was so French, and I loved every minute of it. I particularly enjoyed all the drone shots that you were seeing of the city. Because if you're like me, that's what I study before I go to any area. It's almost like I have a map in my head before I land to kind of pick out my routes and get a little bit more info. So I really, really enjoyed that, seeing the Arc de Triomphe and the Eiffel Tower and the Louvre and Montmartre, all these different areas that we're able to visit during the French Cider Tour. We actually meet in Paris and then roll out to Normandy. And one of the kickers for me, and I hope you caught it. It's about 1 hour and 26 minutes into the opening ceremony. So if you could do that on your television or computer, definitely check it out. But what fruit did they showcase at the Olympics? Hello, it was an apple. It was a yellow apple, or it could have been Plante de Blanc, which is a peri pear, but I pretty much think it was an apple. There were no other fruits at all during the entire opening ceremony. But they brought in an apple as part of a minion, one of those like cartoon characters, a minion doing a little archery and shooting an arrow into a yellow apple on the head. And I just like screamed while watching it, there's an apple on the Olympics opening ceremony. I was just so thrilled for that. It's those moments that you notice when there's a shift. And I just have this little feeling, I mean, I could be totally wrong, but maybe that cider person out there was on the committee for the opening ceremony and they were able to get that in. I don't know, maybe? I mean, why not? This little thing for French cider. I mean, geez, I love it. So, yes, going to France, it's coming up. And again, if you're not following Cider Chat, I think I might have my own Olympic run getting to France to fill the cup. I don't know. Stay tuned. Follow Cider Chat on TikTok, on Instagram, on Facebook, and I'll be rolling out some stuff there once I get going. It's really, for me, it's only like a month away right now. So you can imagine the amount of organization that's taking place. But that's what's going on this summer. I hope that you're enjoying the Olympics because it's all about athletes, unity, coming together, which is what this keynote that John is delivering in this episode for you is really all about. So we're going to be rolling to that next. I'm going to give you a little bit of a backstory on the keynote and to give you a sense of really a little bit of the story behind it as best I can. Let's take a little pause here and I'll be right back.
Walking through the orchards.
This keynote address was delivered at New York Apple Camp in 2023. The camp itself was held at the Ashokan Center, which is in the Hudson River Valley. It's on the west side of the river. And Ashokan, the whole camp, is really driven by musicians in many ways. And so that was so poetic for John because he's a big fan of jazz and music. And as you will shortly hear, he interweaves all these musicians like Coltrane and John Lennon into the keynote. And for this particular talk, he put on a different shirt. He'd been wearing a t-shirt the whole weekend, but he put on this really colorful yellow shirt, almost kind of a blend of like African print on it, stood there in shorts with a baseball cap and bare feet. And you can see a photo of that at the show notes for this here episode 422 at ciderchat.com. There's also a photo that I took from a different vantage point in the actual main hall that he delivered it at. And that's a view looking down at John. And it might not mean a lot to you, but it meant a lot to me. He and I had been touching base, the summer before at the main Apple Camp, and then again here, and kind of talking about stuff going down in Ciderville that was just not really happy news. And I know it's certainly worn on me, and I know it's worn on so many folks. I'm not alone in that. I got particularly targeted for leading an event and then was threatened with a lawsuit. And that just doesn't, just not great stuff, right? Nobody wants that. But that's what happened. And it's just left really bad vibes. And, how do you come out of that? And I was struggling with that. In fact, coming up to this episode release, I reworked the episode titled Cider's Key. It's now called Cider's Key and Remix. That's episode 385. There's a link in the show notes there. You can listen to it if you want. If you heard it before, it's changed. I took out some stuff just to kind of clean it up. But in that episode, it kind of brings us back to New York Apple Camp, because at Apple Camp on the opening day, John delivered a couple of remarks, and he made a quote from O-sensei, Morihei Ueshiba. O-sensei is the founder of Aikido. It's a martial art that I studied, and it happened just like circumstance that John had a copy of his book, from Morihei Ueshiba, and made this quote about bravery, friendship, love, and wisdom. And it really hit me. Like my whole life has always been kind of like compartmentalized. When I was an international consultant, I was doing that. When I was doing Cider Chat, I was, barely talking about that. But one thing is true throughout all of this is that I have always been practicing Aikido for all these years of my adult life. And it is a philosophy and principles behind Aikido that really drive me. And maybe some might think I'm kind of like too righteous in that, and I probably am. My moral compass is like way over the map, and it kind of screws me sometimes because I've always seen the world through rose-colored glasses. And so when I see injustice, it really, really impacts me more than it probably should. But there you have it. That's who I am. And I'll cop to the fact that it does mess me up sometimes because I take things really close to the heart, and I have this kind of weird belief that when a community sees an injustice, they should be standing up for that too. But we know that, folks kind of follow along and they do selective activism, might like be really working on something that's happening on the other side of the world because that's safe. But when it's happening in your own special spot in Ciderville, it's easy to turn the cheek, especially if it's going to hit you financially. I mean, when it hits your own pocket, suddenly your codes of conduct change because that can mean a really hard hit for your business. And believe me, I felt it. But without getting further into it, I know that it really impacted John because as we were talking about that experience, he encouraged me to play this keynote for the community. And so here it is. I'm playing it for the community, for you out there in Ciderville. You're going to be hearing him kind of meandering through. And I've listened to this keynote so many times. And the first time I heard it, I was just like laying up above in this loft on a couch, just trying to hear his words. I wasn't even in the room itself. I was up on a loft, and it was kind of echoing through. And I was just taking it in and trying to follow his train of thought, to tell you the truth. And it's taken me a number of times to just kind of process through the keynote of what he was saying. But I know he's imploring in many ways to look at legacy, to look at passing that torch, to look at kindness, and to look at what we do with anger, and really to rise above that. So I love him for that, because it's not just what's in the cup or in the bottle, or to me, just making the dollar. If it was that, geez, I wouldn't be doing Cider Chat. I really wouldn't. But it's for the love of the community, and to hopefully, in my small way, what I did for so many years in conflict management was to speak up when people are being bullied, to speak up when there's something that's not right. And yeah, sometimes I have anger on that. Don't like it, but there you have it. And we work through it. And this is a little bit about what he's talking about here. And yet he weaves it on. So it's really kind of outstanding. It's not your classic keynote. And I hope you get something out of it that you could take and hold to kind of encourage you to keep on walking forward, especially if you are someone who does believe in the beauty of Ciderville, who believes in, including others. And when you hear something in a room and somebody is not being stood up for, that you take that step forward and stand up for them. I think that's where we're moving towards. I really have a lot of hope right now. And I'm hoping that you're on that same page. And if you're not, well, you don't have to listen. You could just scroll past all this and go to his keynote, or just go on to another podcast. But I hope not. I hope that we're on the same page. So we're going to be rolling to this again, the keynote address at the New York Apple Camp 2023. Led by John Bunker. There'll be links in the show notes to John, his work at Super Chili Farm. I've had a number of episodes with John talking about a whole range of topics. I'll also be telling you a little bit after this keynote address what is coming up on Cider Chat with John Bunker that you'll be able to also look forward to. But in the meanwhile, I'm going to encourage you, as always, to grab a glass and join this chat with John Bunker of Cypri Chili Farm, based up in Maine, as he delivers the keynote address at New York Apple Camp 2023.
I wore this shirt because it's one of my favorite shirts. It's made of my favorite material, which is rayon. And if you don't know rayon, you can come up and touch my shirt afterwards. It is the best. It's better than silk. It is amazing. And I got this if you know your music, I got this at Jazz Fest in New Orleans. And I get to wear it about once every 10 years. So I thought maybe I'd wear it today since we're at a music venue. And because I'm going to talk about music. You thought I was going to talk about apples, but I'm really going to talk about music. So there are many things that I love about music. Just kidding. There are many things that I love about gardens and orchards. And most of all, it's being outdoors for many hours a week, sometimes many hours a day, day after day, all year round. If it isn't raining or snowing, or maybe even if it is. It doesn't matter what I'm doing. There's apple picking, of course. Maybe that's the most fun. But it's pruning, planting, grafting, scything, weeding. It's all a gift. I love the time that it gives me to flex my aging muscles. All the while I get to observe and contemplate, observe and think, observe and wonder, geek out at what's currently in bloom, dream, and imagine. I marvel at how different the orchard looks from year to year, month to month, day to day, sometimes with fruit and often without. I imagine that the plants have allowed me to get into their community. On their part, maybe reluctantly, or maybe enthusiastically, but it probably wasn't stupidity, and it certainly wasn't coercion. Plants are not coercionable, if I might coin a term, and they're definitely not stupid. I think of them as my companions, my friends, mentors, partners in a strange sort of sci-fi partnership. Strange because they're as different from us as space aliens. And not only that, unlike us, they do everything well, extremely well. They could live here on Earth forever, and the air and water would only get cleaner. The soil would only become more fertile. The deserts would become jungles. The more plants there are, the cleaner, the merrier, the more lively, more lush, beautiful, fecund, vibrant, and eternal the world would be. I imagine that together, some version of a team, we can do it even better. Maybe that makes me delusional. Or maybe with their help, I can do it better. That's agriculture. You listen closely, and the plants teach you how to be a farmer and really how to be a better person. I had the good fortune of being born on John Lennon's 10th birthday. So even though we may be nothing alike, I never did get a chance to meet him, darn, I feel a certain kinship with him. Anyone with a record company called Apple can't be all bad. Do I have a favorite John Lennon song? Do I have a favorite cider apple, pie apple, daughter, son-in-law, grandchild? The word imagine doesn't tell you what to do. It doesn't provide you with any answers. It isn't dictatorial. It isn't reprimanding. It merely asks you to consider, to suppose, to imagine. For example, imagine that no one here this afternoon, not one of us, was ever angry again about anything, ever. Maybe that's also delusional or impossible or unhealthy or whatever. But think of all the additional time we'd have to do all sorts of great stuff. No more anger about anything. Even all those things that we feel so entitled to be angry about. The weather, the crop this year, the climate, politics, religion, war, our parents, our childhoods, families, gender, racism. The list is infinite. No more anger means no more grudges. And it probably means no more us and them. No more polarization. No more quibbling. No more panic or sleepless nights. So much more time. And while we're at it, imagine none of us ever got into a car again as well. Happy to be here on Earth and nowhere to go, like the old apple tree. I look over at the stone wall along the edge of our orchard. How much time did it take to clear the 10 acres we call Finley Lane? Where do they find that time? All that time I've spent in a car. What did I give up to drive back and forth all over the place in a car? What did I give up to spend all that time being incensed, disgruntled, hurt, jealous? Someone once said to me that holding a grudge is like taking poison and expecting the other person to die. We'd have years of time to build those stone walls, weed the gardens, wander through the orchard, and check out the trees and the other wildlife around us, and just goof off and hang out and sip cider, or not. I don't think the plants ever get angry. I don't think the plants know how to hold a grudge. They just love to hang out in amazing yoga positions. They never go anywhere. This has given them quite a few years to figure things out. The apple trees, after all, predate us by 30 million years or so. How did they ever do it without us? For some time, I'd been experimenting with different ways of growing apple trees. A friend of mine calls my most wild attempt Jurassic Park. I try to mimic the chaotic-looking plant communities on the side of the road or the riverbank, the stone wall, or the ocean side. I call it multifactorial synergy. Dozens of species growing together with apple trees scattered around here and there. At first glance, it does look chaotic, but there is an elegant and harmonious organization there surrounding that tree in the ditch by the side of the road that reveals itself if we take time to observe over and over again, month after month, year after year. We go deep, and if we're persistent and lucky, we unlock the door and dive in. Speaking of Jurassic Park, as Michael Crichton said, only at the edge of chaos can complex systems flourish. For many years now, my favorite music has been that of Sun Ra. Although some of his music is fairly benign, much of it appears to border on chaos. Like the garden to the one who cannot yet see, the music can be very difficult to listen to. In the early 1960s, the period when John Coltrane was playing some of his most challenging, wild music, he was asked by an interviewer if he felt angry. He replied, "No, I don't." Then he continued, "Maybe it sounds angry because I'm trying many things at one time. I haven't sorted them out. I have a whole bag of things I'm trying to work through to get to the one essential. Some harmonic devices that will take me out of the ordinary path if I use them. But I haven't played them enough, and I'm not familiar with them enough yet to take the one single line through them. So I play them all, trying to acclimate my ear so I hear." Leaving the ordinary path is not an easy thing to do. To do so may require, as John Coltrane said, doing many things at one time, multifactorial synergy. Imagine that we could follow the lead of the plants out of the ordinary path to the one essential. The critics were calling Coltrane angry and his music unbeautiful. But he was following Thoreau's different drummer, talking harmony and acclimating his ear so he could hear. His music may have seemed like chaos, but it possessed a structure inaudible to many unfamiliar observers. If you can call the one who does not yet see or hear an observer. As Sherlock often said to Watson on numerous occasions, you see, but you do not observe. Do we dismiss what do we do not yet observe, or sometimes even see? Is the misunderstood simply still invisible or inaudible? Sometimes what we don't understand triggers anger within us, frustration, jealousy. Observing and understanding structure requires time. Time requires time. Less driving, less anger, less obsession, less distraction, more time to put to use. As Thich Nhat Hanh said, when we're able to see clearly, understanding and compassion arise, and anger and jealousy fade away. Coltrane, Sun Ra, and Monet's late water lilies, and the apple tree growing in the hodgepodge community and the pucker brush by the side of the road have a structure that requires time and determination to understand. Sometimes huge amounts of time and great determination to recognize a deep level of harmony. Are we willing to take the time to acclimate ourselves to see and internalize the structure the plant communities create on their own? If we are to learn anything from them, such as maybe how to get out of the horrible mess we've created for ourselves, it appears that the ordinary path has failed, and it's now time to try something else. As Henry Miller said, there is no salvation in becoming adapted to a world which is crazy. So you listen and listen and listen, and eventually the structure emerges. What I thought was angry chaos becomes elegantly structured beauty. When the jazz pianist Marian McPartland was asked what makes a great jazz musician, she said 4 things: play in any key, improvise, swing, and have a sense of humor. She could have been describing an old apple tree, or maybe a farmer. Farmers have to play in every key. They improvise every day, sometimes all day. They swing, sometimes even from an apple tree, and they wouldn't survive without a sense of humor, especially when sometimes it seems like every day is a test. One of my favorite old jazz tunes is Slim Gaillard's Laughing in Rhythm. The band just plays and laughs for 3 minutes. Occasionally, they all cry out together, laughing in rhythm. I think they might have all smoked something before they turned on the recorder, but they're certainly having fun. On the other hand, anger, a distraction, sometimes a massive wall. It prevents us from seeing structure, from acclimating our ear, from going into anything. It prevents us from laughing in rhythm, or, as Billie Holiday sang, laughing at life. It prevents us from inventing a new agriculture and a new world. Do I ever get anything done when I'm fuming about the latest bad thing, or injustice, or inconsiderate person, or uncooperative weather? It's immobilizing. It's debilitating. What would the world look like if none of us were ever angry again? We could laugh like Slim Gaillard anytime we were put to the test. The test. The test winter is an old meteorological term. Most of you know it. For a winter with untimely cold or radically fluctuating temperatures, or both, when the trees are put to the test and the orchardist is put to the test. Historical meteorological records document 7 test winters in the past 200 years, 4 in the 19th century, and 3 more in the 20th century, 1906-7, 17-18, and 33-34. During the last test winter, 1933-34, over 1 million apple trees died in Maine, 2/3 of all the cultivated apple trees in the state at the time. In New York that winter, 16 million cultivated apple trees died. One of the old-timers in Palermo told me he would stand outside at night that winter and listen to the trees exploding in the woods. In severe test winters, like that one, many trees don't make it, but many do. We're overdue for another big test. It's coming. Maybe it's here. Some will make it, others will not. In recent years in central Maine, the first frost has come later and later in the fall. That warmer weather triggers new growth on many of our apple trees in September and October. This certainly looks good, especially in the nursery. The glitch here, though, is that shortly after Halloween, the temperatures have been plummeting. Not a problem for the garden, which has been put away by then, or the many plants in the farm or in the woods that have already gone dormant, but not a good thing for fresh fruit tree growth. It can be a big problem. It can be fatal. We call this winter kill, but much winter kill actually happens weeks before the solstice. On the flip side, in the early spring, we've had warm temperatures when it ought to be cold, tricking the fruit trees into waking up early, followed by sub-freezing temperatures during bloom, like this year. It's a test. Byron Katie says, when arguing with reality, you always lose 100% of the time. Or as Robert Frost, I'll paraphrase him, when he says goodbye to the orchard, he says, fear 50 above, more than 50 below. Meanwhile, there are no climate deniers in the plant world. The plants are on it. They've sprung into action. Some are shifting locations, some are leaving, others are arriving, some are simply fading away gracefully and saying goodbye. Others are coming up through the cracks in the pavement. Old factories are being spontaneously covered with sod. Plants are forming new communities everywhere. I come to the end of the nursery row. I'm weeding. My watch and phone are somewhere back in the house under a pile of something. I take a swig of water from my water bottle and start another row. Switching to citrus or mangoes might not be the best answer. Southern apple cultivars? Maybe worth a try, but are they any more used to erratic temperature swings than anyone else? Though counterintuitive, maybe we should plant hardier apples, like the ones with Duchess and Alexander in their ancestry. Our Duchess types mostly drop their leaves in early fall, regardless of the temperature. It's hard to fool them. Maybe the hardy Russian dormancy is triggered by light, less apt to be tempted by heat. A bunch of our apple flowers did get walloped in the early hour of May 18th. Only a scattering of fruit on those trees, if any. But some cultivars are fruiting pretty well. Could this be because of blossom hardiness, if there is such a thing? All of our frostbite and black Oxfords have a good crop, and they're scattered all around the farm. So they must have gotten hit that morning. Both have long bloom seasons. Could that have helped? Frostbite has Duchess buried in its ancestry. That may have helped too. Our red field also has an excellent crop. It's one of the first to bloom and has Alexander as a grandparent. So much to observe. We're cautioned to avoid the late bloomers, but some of ours were still at green tip on May 18th and didn't even realize that it had gotten cold. We have a wonderful licorice-flavored late-blooming dessert cultivar called Milo Gibson. It has a good crop. On April 30th, we had 6 inches of rain. May 10th, when the plums were in full bloom, we had 24 degrees. That was challenging for the plum crop. We do have some plums, though not as many as we would have had. It was the late flowering plums that squeaked through. Then it was shaping up to be one of the best apple blooms we'd ever had. Then on the morning of May 18th, the temperature was 22 degrees when I looked at the thermometer on the back porch at 6 a.m. Should I have been angry? Grr. The beech and sumac and oaks had all just recently leafed out. All, or nearly all their foliage died that day. The sumac have come back with a vengeance, as you'd expect. The oaks have come back, though a little more reluctantly. The beech are still struggling. Amazing that we have any apple crop at all. Maybe we should make more cider, lots more, enough to last a few years until the next good crop. Or make brandy. We drank 40-year-old brandy in Normandy. We should have at least one more decent crop by 2063. Imagine, could it be? We should at least consider planting orchards of many cultivars with many bloom times, though definitely inconvenient for that darn spray schedule. There's a chance that it could give us a lot of fruit, even in a season like this one. And while we're at it, maybe it's time to throw away the spray schedule, too. And maybe we should plant more seedling apples. Maybe that's all we should plant. Thank you, Eliza. The diversity there is undeniable. The fruit can be excellent, especially for cooking and cider. In fact, my neighbors, my old-timer neighbors, they always called the seedlings in the woods, they called them cider apples. And I thought it was a pejorative. And then when we really started to get into cider, I realized it was actually a compliment. You can select the parents of both, or at least of one of them if you like. It's fun to watch them grow, and it's definitely fun to name them. The apples may have been a bust, but the asparagus was excellent. Evidently, it didn't notice 22 degrees snuggled there under the dirt, although the ones that were up did look pretty bad. The blackberry bloom was fantastic. We have a great raspberry crop, and the blueberries are coming in. They look like they're really good. It looks like we're going to have a huge elderberry crop, and it was the best pea year we'd had in a long time. When I arrived in Palermo, central Maine, where I live, in May of 1972, there were ancient apple trees all over town. There still are 50 years later, although now far fewer. Although I wasn't able to tell the age of apple trees back then, and I'd never heard of 1933, I could tell that the apples I fell in love with were very old. As I learned more, it became clear that they were way, way older than 40 years, which would have taken them back to 33. More likely, they were 140 years old. Later on, I learned the stories of the test winter and the aftermath, when the incredible mess of millions of dead and dying apple trees had to be dealt with. But some of them made it. Why? The Palermo orchards in the old days were small. Everyone had one. There were typically 10 to 20 trees at most. There were rarely more than 2 trees of the same variety. The rare 50-tree orchard was considered a source of bonus income on the occasional fruiting year when you'd get a good crop of Spies or Ben Davis. These were small, diversified, semi-self-sufficient farms in an economy based on trading and barter. Not much money ever changed hands. My old next-door neighbor told me that during the Depression of the 1930s, we were poor, John, but we always had plenty to eat. In 2020 and 21, we got descended upon by brown-tailed moth. Neighbors called me weeping. If you don't know brown-tail, consider yourself fortunate. It was horrible. Then in 2022, we got hit with fire blight. That made brown-tail seem like a picnic. I cut truckloads of branches. I had to chop down several of my favorite 20-year-old trees, including one grafted by my apprentice who lived with me for years, became like a son to me, and then died tragically when he was in Europe studying agriculture. He was 25. I didn't want to cut down his tree, but in the end, I did. Fire blight has definitely upped my observation skills. I suppose I can thank it for that. I've never heard the term test spring, but maybe we had a test spring this spring. Imagine the small diversified farm comes back. Imagine the government made good on 40 acres and a mule. Imagine subsidies to keep a roof on every old barn still standing. Imagine farm work that pays a living wage. What would our lives be like if we spent most of our time outside, observing, contemplating, laughing, and geeking out over everything? What if cannabis had never been made illegal, and we'd been making clothes and rope and paper and orchard sprays from pot all along? I've read that cannabis is antifungal and antibacterial. As J. Krishnamurti said, it is no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society. What would our lives be like if nothing was good or bad ever again? Or as Masanobu Fukuoka says in One Straw Revolution, when we enter a world in which the two aspects of yin and yang return to their original unity, the mission of these two symbols comes to an end. And what about those ancient apple trees? Did they have a crop every year? I doubt it. We can be fairly certain that all of our favorite old trees had no fruit many times before we ever saw them. And yet, something inspired those orchardists of the past to forge ahead, to select and graft and plant and observe. Select, graft, plant, observe. Select, graft, plant, and so on for generations. In many cases, they probably never ate or even saw the fruit before they died. They did this thing for us. And even though I never met them and will never know their names, they were mentors. They were guides. They teach and inspire me every time I see the old tree. I think about how I got here today, a progression of people, mentors, guides, maybe human signposts who happen to be at the right time, at the right place, at the right time, just for me. Because of them, I took the right fork in the road. Thank you, Yogi Berra. I couldn't have done it without them. They got me here, and I'm grateful to them all. Relatives, neighbors, school teachers, employers. In some cases, they were total strangers who appeared like the Lone Ranger, and then they were gone, but gave me another clue before they left. In many cases, they were completely unaware of the ways that they changed my life, and they'll never know. Some were famous, and I only knew them through their writing or painting or music, like John Lennon or John Coltrane or Sun Ra. Some were dead long before I was born, like those who planted the ancient apple trees around town many decades before I arrived. The trees are the visible gifts to us from total strangers, the anonymous grafters of the past. The trees themselves were and are also like signposts that point me to the stories, the names, the orchard, the garden, the soil, the fields, the flowers, the woods, the water, the sky. Because of that gift, I am still here. Over the years, I occasionally have met people who are my age or younger and who tell me they aren't planting apple trees because they won't live long enough to get the fruit. I'm reminded of my orchard mentor, Francis Fenton, who died at the age of 99 and 10 months in the bedroom in which he was born. He was still planting apple trees well into his mid-90s and working in his orchard a week or two before he died. For years, he would come to our public tree sale and be an unofficial salesperson for the day. He always insisted for paying for any trees that he wanted to take home. One year at the sale, Francis was probably 95 at the time. I walked past him when he was in the checkout line. He was chatting it up with the people around him. I heard him declare to someone, "I always wanted a red astrakhan." Plant trees. Sometimes I wish I could track down the grafters of the past, the ones who were quite possibly unaware of the life-changing gifts they were casting out into the universe. Or were they? Without them, all the old varieties and all the old ways, for that matter, would be gone. Who were these people who did this great thing for us? But then I think perhaps it doesn't actually matter who grafted the Black Oxford or the Spice Sweet or the Starkey or the Kavanaugh that I love. Perhaps what is far more important is that somebody just did it. Someone thought enough about the future to plant the trees that I now get to pick. We say, don't shoot the messenger for good reason. If that's the case, and I think it is, perhaps we should also say, don't praise the messenger. John Lennon said in an interview just before his death, and it might have even been the night he died, we're carrying that torch, like the Olympic torch, passing it hand to hand to each other, to each country, to each generation. That's our job. Thousands of people have carried the torch. Most of us will never know who they were. It's all about the torch. We must pass the torch. This brings up the topic of credit and blame. Not so long ago, a friend left an organization to which they'd contributed a great deal, a lot. No one honored them or gave them credit for the good work they did. It stung. It's tough letting go of the concept of credit. Credit, acclaim, and especially fame are all overrated. I would say they are, unfortunately or fortunately, irrelevant. If getting credit could help save the world would have been saved long ago because of all the people who have received mountains of credit. Who invented rope? Who invented the boat or the bowl or the wheel or the knife? Who invented grafting? Over the centuries, some do nothing and get heaps of credit. Some contribute nothing and get lots of fame. Many do much and get no credit at all. They are the anonymous ones who graft the trees and change the world. I heard another interview long ago on the radio with another famous jazz saxophonist. It might have been Coltrane, but I can't remember. Maybe it was Charlie Parker or John Gilmore. They asked him how he got into music. His reply went something like this. I was walking down the street as a young child with my mother, and we found ourselves standing in front of a music store. I looked in the window and saw a saxophone in the display, and I said, that's it. Did the music store owner ever know what they had accomplished simply by putting the saxophone in the window? Probably not. Imagine each one of us is that saxophone in the window. Each one of us is the baton passer. Each one of us is carrying the torch that everyone could see if they only looked. And someday, someone will see. Maybe somebody that you never know. What torch shall we carry? Imagine we gardened and orcharded in ways no one may have ever done before, or if they did, it was long ago. In Maine, the small farm is making a comeback. The average age of the farmers in Maine is getting younger and younger. It may be the youngest in the U.S. Maybe it's time to say goodbye to commodity ag. It showed us what it can do. Now maybe it's time to try something else. Imagine Congress supporting small farms and paying farmers enough to live on. And what if we thought of as our own orchards? What if we thought of them as a gift to the future, to people that we will never know? Recently, a fruit exploring friend was panicking that we don't have enough people to track down the last historic apples in Maine before they're all gone forever. It's terrible. We will lose a lot of genetic material. There are old varieties waiting for us, hoping that we'll find them and set them free. But we won't get to them all. What are we going to do? Imagine you are the torch, the baton passer, the saxophone in the window. We just do the work and know that someone will see. Someone will see. We plant the trees, some of which will be around long enough so that they're here long after we're gone. Maybe just a few, but even a few will be enough. We know they'll need them, whoever they are. And here's our chance to hitch a ride into the future by way of the apple trees that we plant. They will see what we've done. They'll learn to prune and plant and graft and pick and press. And they will pick up the torch and carry it on for the generations after them. One day, 100 years from now or so, when we're all gone, two friends will be out in the orchard apple picking. And one of them will ask the other, "How did you get into apples?" And like a pomological John Coltrane, the other will reply, "One day I saw this old apple tree, and I knew." Thank you.
That was John Bunker delivering his keynote address at the 2023 New York Apple Camp. If you'd like to hear more from John Bunker, you could go into the search bar at ciderchat.com and find a whole bevy of episodes with John. Also coming up on Cider Chat, on August 21st, you're going to be hearing Apple ID 101. And this is a really involved, detailed presentation that John delivered at CiderCon 2024 in Portland, Oregon. CiderCon is held by the American Cider Association each year. And this year, he delivered both Apple 101 and Apple 102. In 101, it's all about Apple ID in terms of how do you seek out information on an apple tree or an apple that you may have and the steps that he takes. It's a delightful presentation, and the entire audio is synced with the slide presentation that he delivered there. If you like what you're hearing, please do become a patron. It really helps out. So we'll have that talk, and then we'll also have the Apple ID where he goes into the detail of each apple. Not each apple, but an apple, and you'll get an understanding of how to identify the apple itself. It's another tremendous presentation. So a lot more coming up with John Bunker, and do follow him. He doesn't have any kind of like social media, but you can follow on his website. It's called outonthelimapples.com. And he's always kind of like available doing something going on out there. And what a wonderful, wonderful historian, apple detective, and speaker he is. And with that, I leave you here. This is Rhea Windcaller signing off for now. Looking forward to seeing you in Ciderville.
We like cider, we like palms, we love orchards and having fun. There is a reason.
There is a reason why we do it like this.
Oh yes, there is.
There is a reason why we do it like this.
Oh yes, there is.
There is a reason why we drink it like this.
Oh yes, there is. There is a reason. We like walking through the orchards, dancing in the streets, smelling all the blossoms, kicking up our feet. We like cider, we like palms, we like orchards, having some fun. There is a reason.
There is a reason why we do it like this. Oh yes, there is.
There is a reason why we do it like this.
Oh yes, there is.
There is a reason why we drink it like this.
Oh yes, there is.
There is a reason. We like walking through the orchards, dancing in the streets, smelling all the blossoms, kicking up our feet.
Oh yeah.
We like cider.
Oh yes, we do.
We like palms.
Oh yes, we do.
We love orchards, having some fun. There is a reason. There is a reason why we do it like this.
Ba-da-da-dum.
There is a reason why we do it like this.
Ba-da-da-dum.
There is a reason why we drink it like this.
Ba-da-da-dum.
Ba-da-da-dum. We like walking down the orchards, dancing in the streets, smelling all the blossoms, kicking up our feet.
Oh yeah.
We like cider.
Ba-da-da-dum.
We like palms.
Oh yes, we do.
We like orchards, having some fun.
Yeehaw!